for our Maximo webcast today in the topic of incidents and investigations. I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's webcast, and I truly hope you find the content both informative and valuable to your organization. For those of you who are new to our On Track's Maximo webcast series, we offer one educational webcast each month on a topic of interest typically suggested by our clients or past webcast attendees. The purpose is simply to provide some insight into the capabilities of Maximo. Sometimes this is a very specific function or perhaps a broader topic. If you have any suggestions for future webcasts, please feel free to email them to us at webcast@ontrackconsulting.com. We will be muting the phone lines throughout the presentation. However, we will open them up at the end of the webcast to allow for any questions you may have. And so that we avoid listening to everyone's hold music, please avoid putting your phone on hold during the question and answer session. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Christian Boisvert. Christian is a senior Maximo consultant with over 7 years of consulting experience. He has implemented work management, inventory management, financial integration, and mobile solution to more than 10 customers in North America. He has developed and facilitated a variety of Maximo training courses and workshops, and his focus has been in oil and gas, healthcare, power generation, and military organizations. And just something to note, I think we have Todd on video, so just as an FYI, and I will hand it over to Christian.
Thank you very much, Tara. All right, good morning, everybody. Just a message again. I can't quite get rid of this little window here, Todd, so unfortunately you're sharing your video with everybody. I don't know how much you want to share that. In any case, I'm going to be muting the lines now, but we will be opening them up again at the end of the presentation.
All guests have been muted.
So here we go. Just to give you an idea, today we're going to be giving an overview of incidents, investigations. As I go through each one of these, I'm also going to be including a functional information. So I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of what they do, sort of an overarching discussion on their functionality. And then I have a scenario which I've bundled together along with the help of a couple of our maintenance experts. So hopefully I've put together their summaries of these scenarios properly. I apologize to any maintenance managers out there just in case you have any in-depth knowledge of these things and I place the comments in the wrong place. So just to get started, the module we're going to be working in here is the Safety and Quality Management module. Now, for our demonstration purposes today, we're going to be using Maximo 7604. Now, the Safety and Quality Management module supports many types of investigations to analyze recurring incidents or defects when root cause analysis or after action review is required. It provides traceability into historical incidents and earlier corrective actions and identifies regulatory compliance against assets and locations. It associates job plans and work orders to these regulations to ensure compliance, significantly reducing the costs associated with that compliance. So a couple of different applications that are involved here: certifications, audit and survey, defects, incidents, investigations, service requests, and solutions. All of these applications do work in concert with each other, as well as a couple of other peripheral applications such as regulations, benefits and losses, and risk assessments. Today our focus is going to be on incidents and investigations. So let's start off with our incidents. So what is an incident? Well, an incident is a record that captures information about an event that deviates from standard service or an event that might disrupt the quality of service. The incident FOIL application can be used to create and modify records of these incidents. It can also be used to manage corrective actions and close the feedback loop to ensure that these things don't occur again, or at least reduce the likelihood of them occurring once again. An incident record is a type of ticket that can be linked to other objects, such as impact records, risk assessments, actions, solutions, work orders, or investigations. As I go through my functional demonstration today, I am going to branch out into a couple of these other applications and create some associated records with my incidents and investigations. Hopefully I've tried to time this correctly and so we don't go over, but there is going to be a lot of input involved in this type of demonstration, so I ask you to just bear with me. So what's the purpose of an incident? Well, after creating an incident record to initially document the incident, you can investigate potential solutions. Once a solution is identified, you can record it on the incident. Now, if resolving the incident involves creating a service request, problem, or work order, you can create those directly from the incident record, thereby creating relationships that come together to fully illustrate what happened, why, and what was done to fix it. And really that's one of probably the best features of Maximo is those relationships between the various objects that tell the story of any type of incident or occurrence that required some follow-up action and possibly changes in the way that we do business or that we approach things. The incident has a number of different statuses. New, of course, is when the event record is created. The record can either be moved to cancel or waiting for review. Waiting for review, I'll just skip around a little bit. An event record waiting for review by an event coordinator. The record can be either canceled, closed, if an investigation is not required, or pending if an investigation is required. In progress means the incident record has been recorded and corrective actions are currently being implemented. Pending is when the event record has been reviewed and an investigation has been created. And that's something that we're going to be doing today. The record has been moved to a resolved status when the investigation is complete. Of course, resolved, an investigation record has been investigated and resolved, and the record can be moved to a closed status when all corrective actions have been complete. Closed, of course, is what happens after the record is resolved and all corrective actions associated to an event record are complete. At this point, your record is read-only and cannot be moved to another status and is considered a historical record. So we're going to start by doing a demo on a particular incident. So I'm just going to move over to Maximo. So again, once again, I'm using Maximo 7604. And as we get into our menus, we're going to find all the applications we're looking for today over here in the Safety and Quality Management module. If you find that I think I've got my screen at a certain resolution where we can see the whole screen. If it's too small, I believe you can press F5 on your screens to go to full screen and make things a little bit larger. So to start off, we're going to go into our Incidents Oil application. Once we're in our Incidents Oil application, just like any other application, we start off in our List tab. We could do some searches for other incidents if we'd already queued up an incident and we're just looking to embellish it. For our purposes this morning, we're going to work with a brand new incident. So I'm going to use my New Incident button and get that going. So when we start off, you can see that this is our incident application. It's got a number of different tabs. And as I move from one tab to the next, I'll try and describe it to the best of my ability and touch on a couple of the key points that it might not be completely obvious to people in the audience. So first we start off with our Incident tab, which is used to capture details related to the incident. We can associate assets, impacts, priority, and people to the record. So by default, we get an incident number. The first thing we'll do is we're going to start off with our incident type. Now, the incident types do come from a predefined domain list, and I'll mention this, a lot of the lists you're going to see today are derived from domain lists which can be edited or added to as need be. So I'm going to choose injury. Next, we have our incident category. We're going to deem this as major. Once again, this is a domain list which can be modified as needed. Next, we're going to add a service address. And this is, of course, where our incident took place. I have created a service address in advance, so I'm not going to belabor you with going through and creating an actual address for that. Next, we get into some of the various things, the administrative portions of our particular incident. Things like who reported the incident, who was affected by the incident, and who did they report this to, possibly a safety coordinator or a lead. So we're using some of you who've used IBM's demo data may recognize some of these names. That's what we're using today. So we're going to start with Fouch, which is actually Colleen Fouch. You'll notice that by default, when we enter a reported by name, it automatically populates the affected person, assuming that the person reported it was affected by it. In this particular incident, somebody was injured, and the person reporting it was not necessarily the person who was injured. That was Mr. Tom Revis here. So poor Tom had a bad incident. Colleen saw it, and she reported it. And she reported it to Dudley, and that's Bill Dudley. My system's a little laggy here today. And now, in our summary, we can start off by putting a bit of header information. So we can say, while standing in proximity to the HVAC system, Tom Revis received a large shock. Shocking, I know. We're just going to identify this as being in the Bedford site. And then when we get into our details, we can, if you want to, typically people will take the summary and then they will embellish on that. So for example, here I could say he received a large shock due to visible arcing from the HVAC's electrical panel. And in addition, he was knocked to the ground and an ambulance was called. Bad day for Tom. So next, as we scroll down, we can identify what action was taken. So when we look at our various actions, we're going to choose a vicinity. For example, a warning was placed in the vicinity. We don't want anybody else to go near this HVAC unit until it's been properly powered down and isolated. And in the details, we can add a little bit more. We can say something like, after Tom was evacuated from the area, the system was isolated and turned off, just as a note there. So now when we get in, this is where the real power of the incident start to occur. We can now start linking this particular incident to our existing Maximo records. In this case, the first thing I want to do is I want to link this particular incident to an asset, i.e. our HVAC system. And I actually already know that that's asset 11200. And as I select that, that'll bring in my asset information, GL location, and asset site. So all of that information has come in for me. So now we get into some of our related records. As we get down, you'll see that we've got some things like a configuration item, which this is not. If we were identifying this as being an incident with a service or service group, or possibly with a vendor, we could identify that vendor. In this particular instance, we want to cite a regulation. We believe that this is possibly a violation of a regulation, but we might not actually have that regulation documented in our particular system, or maybe it needs to be updated. And that's okay. Even if we don't have it available to select, we can link right over to that regulatory compliance application right from our incident application and create that regulation as need be. So this pops us into our regulation compliance application. You can see that we linked over from the incidents because we've got the tabs up at the top here. we're going to create a brand new regulatory record. And of course, in my regulatory record, we'll just call this one 1553, or 9, pardon me. And we'll call this, say, this is our HVAC inspection frequency and maintenance. And I'm trying to make this as generic as possible. That wasn't a pun because I'm applying this generically. If you can leave it as generic if you want to use this regulation in multiple places. I want to be a little bit more specific, as one of our options happens to be an asset, and this particular regulation is specific to our particular asset. Now, as we get down, we've got our regulation number, and I've got that as DOT 355. We don't have a safety critical element here, but we do have a regulatory subsection, which is 4, and I'm not sure why that's giving me some trouble there. Oh, here we go. That was strange. Okay, so now we've got it as our section 4. Who is our regulatory authority? Well, this is going to be the American HVAC Code, or the AHC. Our regulatory region is Massachusetts, and our regulatory country is United States. And we're going to set this as being valid from July of last year, and we'll say that it doesn't expire for a few years, so roughly 3 years in effect here. If we had an external system reference, possibly if you were holding all your different regulations in a different system, you might want to put in an identification number. And this is just a free-form text, so we can just put in a number here as it relates to an external system if we did have one. If there were insurance requirements, you can check that off. Or if you had need of saying that this supports a safety case, well, then you could check that off as well. And then if you do check off the safety case, you will be required to put in a safety case reference down below. In our details, I'll say something to the effect of Section 2 of the HVAC Code regulation prescribes the conditions for the, for the use of the equipment related to, my typing is getting worse already. Related to HVAC systems. The code defines these requirements as approved as referenced in the code. There we go. So once we've got that all set up, we can save our changes. One thing to note, any of these additional records, i.e. your regulations, your risk assessments, or your impact analysis, will always start off in a draft status. And you can't link them back to your main record until you change that status from draft into active. All right, there we go. Once we've got that done, now I'm going to hit my return with value. Whoops. And it's not liking that. And we did run into a small system issue earlier on where we were having this problem with linking back. We had our text looking into it. I apologize. We may run into this a couple of times as we go through. So my apologies for that. I have created the record, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to link it back at this time, but at least we got to do the demonstration of the regulation there. So had we done that, we would have populated our regulation field in here, and then we'd have a regulation associated with this particular incident. And of course, the strength of that is for your reporting and maintenance, you can go back and, maintenance and reliability reporting, you can go back at the end of the year and possibly do a query and say, hey, how many incidents occurred that were related to this particular regulation? Maybe we need to take a look at our preventative maintenance and check that out. So now we get into something like who was impacted. Well, obviously, poor Mr. Tom. He had a bad day. There we go. And you can also, if you wanted to do some reporting on how many incidents certain individuals have been involved in, maybe they need some additional safety training, something that might happen there. If you did have any attachments, if you possibly wanted to add a link to the regulatory website or possibly some other paperwork that you've done on the side that you want to make sure is included in this particular incident record, you can use Maximo's default attachment functionality to add files or web pages as needed. Now we get down into our risk and consequence section. So which hazard were we experiencing here? Well, I think it was high voltage was definitely what we encountered. So from my list, I'm going to select my high volt. That comes in there. Next, I've got my risk assessment. Now, of course, I don't have a risk assessment already created for this particular incident, but that's all right. Once again, I can link over to that application and create a brand new document that we can associate with this particular incident. So now I'm in the risk assessments oil application. I link to it from my incidents, and I can type, this is going to be high voltage causing electrocution on HVAC system. This is going to be our Bedford site. We don't actually have a job plan associated with this. We do have a location as identified by our asset. Next, we can take a look at our approved and our approved date. This would be the person actually approving the risk assessment. So some people will populate the name now and then populate the approval date upon approval, just so they've got those people in there. I'm going to have to fudge my dates a little bit because normally everything we're doing today would take place over the course of possibly days or weeks, but we're doing it all in one session. So I'm going to select an approver here. And that is going to be Mr. Dudley. And I'll come back to the rest later on. All right, so now that we've got that, we can start identifying other things like our risk categories. Once again, these risk categories are domain values. If you wanted to add some or change these, you can definitely go into the system and customize these to your own industry's standards. In our assessment type, I'm going to put this as a job safety review. I think it's most appropriate. And of course, my most significant ranking, we'll rank this as very high, just given the gravity of what possibly could have happened. And our most significant risk priority, well, we'll give that a 2. All right. Once we've got all of that identified and we've got that all set up, we can now identify this with some of our risks and precautions. Again, those of you that are familiar with the safety application Maximo will know that for certain assets you can associate risks and precautions and hazards, and that's what we're going to get here. We're going to identify some hazards and precautions as previously defined in the system. Now, we already identified high voltage before. We're actually going to do that once again. I will warn you, you may see some redundancy in a lot of the records that we're going to be creating here. Just sort of the nature of the beast. Maximo tries to give you as many columns and fields as you can possibly use. when you implement this in your own industry, probably one of the first things people will do is they'll decide on whether or not a particular field is best suited to live in the risk assessment or perhaps in the incident application itself, and possibly not both. Next, we can get into our review and approvers. These are people that are reviewing and approving the risk assessment. You can have more than one reviewer and more than one approver if you like. I'm going to limit myself to one just for this example, and I'm going to set this to Adams. Now, if you're wondering, okay, well, I pulled up this people list and I am limited to about 7 people. One of the reasons for that is because on your people records, don't forget that in Maximo, you now need to go in and there's checkboxes in the details section of the people record where you have to identify people as being authorized to be reviewers or approvers. That is a limitation that is actually optional and it's set in your organizational options. Right now we have that turned on, so that's why I am limited to those particular people. And I'll just type Mr. Motika. Oh, there's a little glitch in Maximo, and I'll show you this right now. Between the reviewers and the approvers, Maximo insists that you press save. So if I try to add my approvers right here, it's going to have a little conniption fit. That's okay, we expected that. If I just leave for a second, press save, now it's happy. Now I can go in, save that, and away we go. Next, we can look at our checklist. And this is our checklist actions. These are things that we want to check off and possibly make sure that have been accomplished, different actions in order to facilitate this actual risk assessment. Now, I don't have an action set up here, so once again, I'm going to branch out into another application, i.e. a standard action, so I can create that and bring it back and associate it with my risk assessment. So you'll notice that we're actually getting 3 layers deep into our various applications. So I'll go to my standard application. Just give it a second. We'll create a new one. And hopefully this won't throw that same system issue we ran into before. And my action here is going to be to isolate the electrical system. Once again, this is going to be for Bedford. This type of action, we're going to keep this generic. Now you may notice that when you look at the various types, you've got generic, MOC, and action tracking. And you can specify where that particular action is used. You'll notice again when we get into category, you get a little bit more of some MOC specific things like procedure, review, update. We're going to keep this as procedure. And of course, then again, same thing relating back to MOC. You can default some of these as either pre-start or post-start actions. We're going to leave them as default so we can use them as either or. We are going to set our response type to a yes or no. So for example, if you were looking at this and saying, well, has that system been isolated? This is essentially a yes or no. Simple voltmeter reading or some other test might let you know that whether it's hot or cold. When you get into your review items, you can be a bit more specific. This is where you can break it down step by step if you like. And here you can add some questions. For example, and this is a little redundant, but I just want to display this particular portion here. Is the HVAC system powered down? And our response type is yes, no. And you can say, yep, our response is required. We can save this. And once again, we do need to change that status into active before we can bring it back to our our risk assessment record. And I'm crossing my fingers that that system issue doesn't rear its ugly head. We'll see in a second here as I return with value. Hooray. Decided to leave us alone that time. Okay, fantastic. So now we've got our checklist done. As we go back, we look at our risk assessment. We've got our actions, we've got our assessments. Looks all good. So I'm pretty happy with my risk assessment now. If everything's been done, you can probably set your approval date right here. Well, it's already set to 4:20 p.m. Let's save this. And once again, don't forget, we're still bringing back a record. We're still a layer out from our incident. Pardon me. So it's still a draft, and I'm going to change my status back to active. Excuse me. There we go. Now I've got it set to active. I'm going to return with value. And now I have a risk assessment, which is associated with my, I've got a risk assessment which is associated with my incident, which is associated with an action. So there you go. We've got a couple of different linkages sitting in there. We're going to identify this as a local incident. These flags are potentially just for reporting. And if you wanted to do an impact assessment, you could already do one of those. Now, we are going to do an impact assessment on the investigation, and I see that I'm running a little over time here, so I'm just going to skip over that and save it till the investigation portion. Okay. Next, we can enter a sequence of events. So, of course, our sequence of events is what occurred. You'll see that the incident details are brought in from the front page, as well as the reported by. We can now specify an internal priority. In some cases, things might not be as important to us as they are to other folks. In this case, this was a very urgent issue, so definitely a person's health is at stake, so it's very urgent. And then when we talk about a sequence of events, here you can draw out the whole story of what happened and essentially create a timeline. So in my sequence of events, I can start with my sequence, and like tasks in work order tracking, your sequences will automatically be numbered 10, 20, 30. This is always beneficial because, for example, if you ever needed to insert one, you could create an 11, 12, or 13 or something of that nature. And I'll say something to the effect of progress was in proximity to the HVAC system when he received an electrical shock. And we'll say that that occurred yesterday at around 8 a.m. Poor guy hadn't even finished his coffee. And we'll, in our notes, if we wanted to add some additional detail, we could do that. Fouch was our witness for this particular one. And if we wanted to add a condition, this is a really undefined domain list. I just wanted to show you right now they've just got condition 1, 2, 3. Again, you might want to change that up and create your own conditions as need be. One thing I just want to note in the notes section, this is actually an extended description. So when you talk about, long description, we talk about a long description, not only can you do a little bit more formatting, but you can also insert things like images. If there was a picture of the incident or some other media that you wanted to use as a record, you could insert that here. Next, we could say that Colleen Fouch witnessed the incident and called an ambulance immediately. When we talk about the timeline, you can say that, well, that was on the same day, and whereas the previous one occurred at 8 a.m., we'll say this occurred at 8:15, very shortly afterwards. And of course, whoops. keep her as the witness there. And lastly, we can put one more little note here. We can say something like, Tom's wife, Martha, called the office and spoke to Joe Oakham to provide an update on Tom's condition. And there we have Joe, and away we go. So we're just going to save our changes there. Next, if we want to talk about our activities, now activities, you can do these in your incident. These also exist in your investigation. We're going to do a little bit more in the investigation than we are here. But for example, in an activity, if I create one, you'll notice it looks a lot like a task from work order tracking. So we're going to keep this one a little simple. I'm going to say launch investigation, into the cause of this incident. And of course, if you did want to provide some additional information, you wanted to do some scheduling, if there was some cost or labor involved, you can put some estimated duration here. I'm just going to leave this as a task, and I'm going to save that. And again, of course, if you were managing these and there was a cost involved, I'm less worried about my status here, but if I did need to incur any cost, you would have to make sure that you promote this particular activity from waiting for approved to approved before you can incur any cost or charge any work to that. All right, next we've got our related records. Now when we talk about related records, these are records that where either this particular incident came from or is going to. As I mentioned previously, we are going to create an investigation. So by simply going create from my select action menu, or my more actions, pardon me, old school Maximo there for you, I can put that up and you can see that the relationship between this investigation and the incident is that the investigation is now a follow-up. All right. So we're looking pretty good there. At this point in time, we're going to change our status. And we're going to say pending. And that's going to be pending our investigation. So just so you know, we're not 100% done with this particular incident. We're going to come back to it after we've done some work on our particular investigation. So before we jump into our investigation, just want to talk a little bit about our investigations. So why do we want to use the investigations module? Well, what are some of the benefits? Consistency, transparency, completeness, and availability of investigation information, connection to work management and asset management functions, visibility to asset history details, informed decisions about asset management, and a structured problem solving. Also collaborative team-based problem solving where you can get multiple people involved. So what are some of the functions? Well, we integrate investigations into the same tool operations uses to control and track work. We can centralize asset failure and analyze data, identify, assign activities within an investigation, just as we showed in the incident just now, identify and assign work orders based on resulting applications if need be. We can create those from our investigation as a related record, provide a link between past, present asset failures and defects, and provide a link between risk assessments, investigation recommendations, and assessment of effectiveness. So when we look at our investigation statuses, these are essentially very similar to what we saw in the incidents. We've got our new, queued, meaning the investigation is assigned to a person, in progress, maybe we started some of those activities, possibly pending if there's some external work that's being done. Maybe you've sent people out to do some data gathering, and we're waiting for those facts and figures to come back before we can proceed with our assessment. And of course, we've also got resolved, which is information which has been gathered, routed, and service has been restored. And of course, closed, which means it's a historical record. There are investigation templates. This is a bit of functionality I just wanted to touch on. If you do have an investigation template that contains activities or job plans, then the application creates an investigation activity for each template activity. An investigation activity might be created for each template job plan. There are a couple of more notes about creating those templates. I will be sharing my presentation, but just as a matter of time, I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit here. So there's a couple of different ways that we can look at an investigation. We can look at it as an at-the-time capture of a problem, cause, or remedy, or in some instances, we might need to do a full formal investigation. And at the time, this really pertains to failure reporting. So a lot of companies are using failure reporting and see huge value in terms of maintenance and reliability reporting. Just by doing this last little step in your work order tracking module, it can really assist you with diagnosing issues, finding out systemic problems, and it's just a huge tool, and it only takes a couple of seconds. So in this case, we're not actually using the investigations module. This is just a little shout out to failure reporting on the work order tracking. It does exist on the investigations module as well, but just as a minimum, we always recommend that a person does this. So you can always record that problem, cause, and remedy, and it helps you build out those failure classes to really to a complete level where you're accurately tracking everything that happened. I'm not going to do a work order tracking demo for the sake of time. I'm just going to go into my full formal investigation. So how do we know we have to do a full formal investigation? Well, we've got an incident occurs, we've done some reporting, we've got some notification. This could be through our incident, possibly a risk assessment, which was done on our particular incident, and we have deemed that an investigation is required. So next we get into our investigation tab. So this is where we initiate an investigation, assemble a team of subject matter experts, assign an investigation lead, and possibly do some scoping. So let's go over to our investigation. Now you could link to it directly from here. So just as a matter of system performance, I'm just going to go direct. I'm going to open the investigations application directly here. All right. And I'll open up my investigation that I just created through my incident. And here it is. And you can see that a lot of the information has been transposed from the incident. And if we just take a quick peek at our related records here, you'll see that tie back to that incident right here. So now, as we go through our investigation, I'm going to add that same service address. Not everything has actually been transposed. You can do a minimal amount of development if you want to create some crossover domains for those Maximo admins out there, just to get some of this stuff to come over a bit more easily. So now we've got our full formal investigation going. We've added our address. We've got our reported by. We've got our investigation lead. So who's going to lead the charge today? I think we'll choose Dudley. And of course, as we scroll down, we see that the summary has been transposed over to here. If we did want to add some additional notes, we could say something. So this indicates what occurred. If we wanted to add a little bit more embellishment, we could say something like visible arcing was observed on the electrical panel of the HVAC system in the engineering building at 301 Elm Street And essentially, we've got an investigation that's going to occur, but I don't think we need to belabor that. All right, coming down, we see we've got our asset and our location already brought in through our incident, which is nice, because now that we've got that set up, we don't have to actually attach those records. If we did want to associate the same risk assessment with this particular investigation, we can do so as well because we've already created that record. So here was the one we created, 1003. There it is. So now we've got both this investigation as well as the incident attached to that particular risk assessment. We can also attach that particular regulation if we wanted to. And there we go. So now we've got everything coming together nicely in our little web. We've already identified, I believe we have our everything else set up. We've identified this, our audit. Knowledge area is one of those less embellished domain lists that exist. If you did want to put something in here, I'm just going to put safety. Again, this is a domain list that can be edited and improved upon. If you wanted to identify this as being a strategic investigation, you could so, or if there's a service level agreement that's in effect here, you can also check that off. At the bottom, as with most applications, if this was affecting multiple assets or locations, you could list those out down below. So as we save this off, we're going to move over to our activities. So activities are certain things that we can do where the investigation lead will typically assign this to his team where they go out and perform various functions. So here I'm going to just create a couple. So my first one might be to isolate the contacts. And I'm not, for the sake of time, I'm not going to schedule the dates. I'm just going to put in a duration. And I'm going to create another one. Once again, it defaults that description. And as another thing, we're going to say inspect bolts and washers. Once again, I'm just defaulting these to 1 hour for the sake of simplicity. Apologies to those maintenance planners out there. And then we've got, whoops, turn on HVAC, check voltage, and check amps. And we'll say that takes 1 hour as well. Now, once we've got all of these things laid out, we've got these waiting for approval. Of course, in order for us to bill any time or create any labor records down here, all of these need to be at least in an approved status. So I'm going to move my tasks actually into an in progress because we've just had our meeting. I've given my team their assignments. They're going out. They're going to get the work done. So until I hear back from them, I'm going to leave this in an in progress status. And you'll notice you can manage these independently. That way you can always at a glance have a dashboard in terms of where you are on your various tasks. All right. Once you've done that, now if you wanted to create some time tracking in terms of who did what work, you can now select a labor record. I'm going to select Mr. Alan Ball, my first class electrician. And Alan went in, and he was working on our first activity, which was isolating the contacts. And once I've got all that in, my rate defaults from Alan's craft record. I can record his regular hours. If there was a contract involved for a contracted rate, we could bring that in here. But otherwise, we're pretty good. Once I save that, just like our actuals, that's now been recorded as an incurred cost. Now, of course, I could go through and create a number of other records, identifying which laborers went in and did the work on all of these other tasks, and at which point we would have a record of what was done and what was completed. So, just in the end, for the sake of moving along here, I want to get especially to my analysis tab, because this is one thing I did not want to gloss over. So there's a number of different investigation methodologies. You've got your 5 why, your root cause analysis, Famika, Ishikawa, a lot of different ways. Maximo does support root cause failure analysis. It also supports, we call it cause analysis in here. It's really our 5 why. That's what I'm going to use for my investigation results today. So presumably, my guys have gone out, they've got me all the information, now we're analyzing those results. So as they come back to me, we can start doing our 5 why approach. Things like, well, there was arcing. Well, why was there arcing? Well, we found out that the cause was loose contacts. So of course then the question becomes, why was there loose contacts? Well, we found out that the loose contacts were caused by vibration. And we can relate this back to our initial line, which was line 1. Why was there vibration? Well, the cause of this was a misaligned belt. We can relate that to our line 2. And why did we have a misaligned belt? Well, we found out that this was a bad install by vendor. All right, and I'm going to relate that back to line 4. And this, of course, we've decided that this was our root cause. So we'll save that off and change that there. Whoops, I forgot my reference line. Okay. And that was just the reference to line 3. And of course, in this particular instance, I've gone in a straight line. There are times where you're going to go off and these might deviate. There might be multiple reasons for having loose contacts, possibly multiple reasons for having a vibration, and then you can split off and create your tree here by referencing back those reference lines as need be. So lastly, I want to get to my failure reporting very quickly and my after-action review. So as I get over to my failure reporting, and I've decided what I'm going to do, I can now go in and I can say, all right, you'll notice that there's a lot of ISO 14224 mechanisms here. I can say that this was an external influence. And again, you can also, this is again a domain list that you can improve upon. Unfortunately, there's no restrictions systematically out of the box that relate your failure mechanism code to your failure mechanism subdivision code. So you have to make this a bit of a business process to make sure that if you choose a 5, you're not choosing a 1.2 afterwards. So just for a lack of options, I'm going to choose a 5.3 here. You can add some additional remarks if need be. And of course, you also have some options to add some subunit codes, component remarks, some manufacturer part codes if you want. This is all good for maintenance and reporting. If you did want to choose a safety failure category, you can say, well, this was random hardware. Once again, configurable list. And what was our hardware mode? Well, this was dangerous and it was undetected. We did not know that was coming. How did we detect it? Well, a guy got electrocuted. I hate to use the word casual. I wish it just said observation. I don't want to belittle his situation there. And of course, what was the barrier to failure? Well, if we talk about our different barrier to failure, was it containment? Was it detection? In this particular case, we'll say this was a protection system, or we'll say shutdown, actually, for our failure. And our barrier failure detection method, pardon me, was an assurance activity, not an audit or survey, which you can do. So now as we get down below, once again, just like in our work order tracking, we have the ability to record our failure coding. So as we list out our failure codes, we can say, well, what was the problem? Well, we had visible arcing. Why did we have it? Well, we had vibration on the contacts. What caused that? Or what was the remedy, pardon me? Well, we aligned the belts. And once we've done that, we've figured out our failure reporting, we've done our analysis, we can document the solution if need be. And I'm running out of time here, but I believe I have a canned solution I can just select. And this was, I just put this in here. Here we go. And you'll notice you can choose more than one solution if need be. And now I've identified that solution with this, so you can say how often that solution is identified. And very lastly, we've got our after action review, in which case we would go in, we would identify, and this could be a couple of months, maybe even a year down the road after you've had time to implement all of your corrective actions. Possibly you want to implement an MOC to change the PM frequency in which these things get inspected. Afterwards, you can have a meeting with the team, look at follow-up data, possibly as a result of that MOC, and have your after-action review where you can record what happened, what the details were, how things have improved, and then you can just make a documented record of how that went. Once all this has happened and you've completed your investigation, you can go back to your incident, pardon me, and record the same values in your failure reporting and possibly your other schedule something. But if there's no more questions, at this time I'm going to close the line. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time and interest, and I look forward to seeing you in future presentations. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.